U.S. President Obama spoke yesterday in New York on the impact of rebuilding America. Take a listen to this.
We could make the decision easier for businesses to locate here in the United States, here in New York State, if we do a better job rebuilding our roads, rebuilding our bridges, upgrading our ports, unclogging commute times. The alternative is to do nothing and watch businesses go to places that have outstanding infrastructure.
Well, my next guest is suggesting something he believes could be a solution. Tax corporations a mandatory 10% on all international earnings. This would be in addition to whatever they're already paying overseas, and use those funds towards rebuilding America's aging infrastructure. Here with me, Maryland Representative John Delaney. You can read about his proposal in the Washington Post today. Congressman, welcome. Companies are already paying taxes overseas. If they're operating in the UK, they're paying around 21%. In Ireland, 12.5%. Why do you want to tax them more?
Well, we don't actually tax them more on their current earnings. What we're focused on is the significant amount of cash that's sitting overseas right now. We have about $2 trillion of U.S. corporate cash that sits overseas. Some of that cash, by the way, is one of the reasons.
And you know why that sits overseas?
Right, because we have
because
a
otherwise they'd
tax
have to pay a 35% tax on it.
That's right. So what we're proposing is take all the cash that's sitting overseas, do a one-time tax on that of 10%, give the companies 10 years to pay it in, and then they can bring all the money back. And then on a go-forward basis...
What if they don't want to bring it back? Is this a mandatory, you pay 10%
This is a mandatory 10% tax. They have 10 years to pay it in, right? So we give them a fair amount of time to pay it in. They can bring it back. But at the same time, we fix the system, so on a go-forward basis, we have more of a territorial system, which is what other countries have, which means you pay tax in the place where you made the money, and then when you bring it back to your home country, you don't pay any additional tax unless your rate was particularly low. Then maybe you top up. But if you pay 20% in Great Britain, you'd be able to bring the money back tax-free.
Well, how does that really fix anything going forward? I mean, it sounds like you're taxing all the money that's over there right now. Why wouldn't Congress want to say, okay, well, we'll just put a 10% tax in on all future earnings too?
Well, I don't think we need a 10% tax on all future earnings, because what we need to do is move to some form of a territorial system, which is what other countries have, which means you pay tax where you earn the money, and you can bring it back. That's what we need on a go-forward basis. But we only change the tax code on a prospective basis.
But why not make this optional? Why not say, okay, if you want to bring that money that's sitting overseas right now that you've already made back onto U.S. shore, we'll let you do so at a 10% tax. Why are you saying we're going to tax all the money that's overseas right now?
Well, so the basis of our proposal was a bill that I introduced in the House about almost a year ago that creates a large-scale infrastructure fund. And it's not capitalized by having the government put the money in, but it's capitalized by creating an incentive for private companies to put the money in. And if they actually invest in this fund, they get the ability to bring their money back from overseas tax-free. So that was the basis of my most recent proposal. And this bill that I introduced a year ago has tremendous bipartisan support. We have 31 House Republicans, 31 House Democrats, and a half a dozen senators on each side of the aisle in the Senate. So it's the biggest piece of bipartisan legislation around economic policy in the Congress. And what's important about it is it shows that there's a real compromise to be had around fixing the international tax system, provided at the same time we increase our investment in infrastructure.
I mean, but is there a danger right now of seeing an increase in inversion mergers when CEOs hear you say you're talking about? Because if you run a big multinational corporation and you've got those profits already overseas and you don't want to pay the 10% tax, maybe you're better off, such as we see with the Pfizer-AstraZeneca deal, relocating your entire corporation to a place like the UK so you don't have to deal.
CEOs love my proposal, because what they really want is to fix the system going forward, and a lot of them want to create a path for the money that's sitting overseas to come back. So the majority of the cash that sits overseas, most U.S. corporations, if they had an option and that they didn't have to pay 35% tax, would bring it back to the United States. So the proposal we've laid forth is very consistent with the proposals that have come out of the business community in terms of what they want to do. The business community understands that we need two different fixes. We need a fix for the system going forward. And then
that to you is a territorial fix.
Is a form modified territorial system. In other words,
what does that mean?
That means if some country sets up a zero tax jurisdiction, if the companies want to bring the money back, they'd have to top up to some number, like 10 to 15%. But for most of our competitive nations, they have a tax rate that's above that, so they'd be able to bring it back tax-free.
Let me ask you, what can we be doing to get more foreign corporations to relocate here? What can we offer for tax incentives so it's not as though U.S. companies want to go flee to Ireland or to the UK?
Well, listen, I mean, our corporate tax system in general needs to be looked at, right? We have the highest corporate tax rate in the developed world right now, right? So that's another component of this. If you look at the Pfizer deal, what's really going on with the Pfizer deal, in addition to this kind of tax inversion, the specific tax provision we're talking about, they are focused on their effective tax rate, which they think will be lower internationally. But what's really driving it, in my opinion, is this repatriation issue. They've got almost $60 billion of cash sitting overseas. That cash is going to be the fuel to help get this deal done. And then on a go-forward basis, they'll have a much easier kind of setup in terms of managing their cash. So fixing this repatriation issue is the #1 issue we need in terms of tax reform. After that, we should definitely look at corporate tax rates, see what deductions don't make sense, eliminate some deductions, lower the rate, make us more competitive, absolutely. But in terms of what U.S. Companies want from this country, is they'd actually like us to also improve the operating environment, which includes our infrastructure, right? The president's talked about it. It's Infrastructure Week in Washington. We've got a massive infrastructure hole in this country. It's roads and bridges, but it's also communications, energy, water.
I agree with you. I guess my one question is, why is this not optional? Why don't you say, listen, you know, company XYZ, if you want to bring that money back, you can do so. We're going to charge you 10%, and that's the deal. But you're saying this is a mandatory 10% on everything.
In the bill that I have in the House right now, it's totally optional. It's 100% optional. It only deals with the money that's sitting overseas. But in order to help do a larger deal, right, and fix the system going forward, having a mandatory kind of cleanup on all the old cash makes a lot of sense if you look at some of the other budget priorities we have. So the bill I have in the Congress right now, it's 100% optional.
But you want to take it a little further.
I'd like to lift up and fix the whole tax system and use the tremendous bipartisan momentum we have on this bill. Right, because we have almost 40 members of Congress on each side of the aisle saying we should increase our infrastructure investment and fix the international tax system. It's the #1 thing we should be doing if we want to actually make our country more competitive.
Representative John Delaney, I'm all for competition. Thank you very much. Okay, coming up next, everyone, unique insight into what American